The healthcare detective Frank Lalli has written a book for Simon & Schuster about how to get affordable healthcare. Called Your Best Healthcare Now. It's available online, in-store, wherever fine books are sold. Mr. Lalli is also the health correspondent for Parade and the former editor of Money and George magazines. Measles, more measles. Measles, measles, and more measles. I mean,
Joe, I'm
No, it's
afraid
asinine.
we just have to keep talking about measles because we have an epidemic here and it continues to increase all across the country. We now have 700 cases, over 700 cases. That includes mass outbreaks in New York's Rockland County and Williamsburg, Brooklyn. And Jill, that's 100 miles from here.
Yeah, and
Now,
and it's concentrated. No, it's concentrated. It's a concentrated area, and so it's going to spread like wildfire. And I think that I don't know. I don't. Well, you'll tell us, but where I'm just the mind boggles as why is it so hard to contain?
Well, I'll get to that for sure as we talk, but add to the scares, the one in Los Angeles where there were 2 cases in 2 universities, that prompted authorities to quarantine 1,000 people. That included more than 100 faculty and staff. Now, when I heard that, my head exploded. So I said, so wait a second, they're quarantining faculty and staff. Aha! They aren't required to be vaccinated. Now, to me, immediately, that looks like a big and dangerous loophole. So I did some reporting this week. And catch this. By and large, children must be vaccinated to attend school. We all know that, and that's all great. But at all levels of education, teachers and staff aren't required to be vaccinated to come to school. And bills to require teachers to get vaccinated were actually voted down in Vermont and Texas a couple of years ago. Now, that's bad policy for a very contagious virus like measles. People don't have flu-like symptoms for the first 4 days. So they can go to school. They don't realize they're ill, and they can sneeze and cough and spread the virus to 30 students packed into a little classroom or even more in the library. Experts report that one sick student, one single, in Williamsburg led to the infection of more than 200 people. Now, a top educator I talked to this week favors rules, regulations, laws, whatever it takes to require teachers and faculty to be vaccinated to come to work. That's Dr. Robert Hull of the National Association of School Boards. And he said to me flatly, quote, there should be no loophole for adults at schools. Now, state authorities, usually it's the Department of Health actually, are coming in after an outbreak and quarantining students and teachers and so on, and even closing some schools. Now in Williamsburg, they're actually fining 57 adults for up to $2,000 a day for refusing to vaccinate themselves or their kids. Some states already allow their school districts, local rule, right? Make your own rules, to prohibit unvaccinated adults to work in their schools. But that's not happening in very many states, very few at all. So meanwhile, groups opposed to government-mandated vaccinations are fighting for what they call informed consent. Now, Jill, that kind of sounds reasonable first time you hear it, informed consent.
I don't even know what that, no, it sounds scary. Informed consent sounds like you have an option.
Well, here's the option. What it means is every parent, teacher, and staffer, everyone, should have the absolute freedom to refuse to get vaccinated, despite what might happen to the community at large. Everybody has that individual freedom. Now, all 50 states allow exemptions for medical reasons. 47 states, all but West Virginia, Mississippi, and California, allow religious exemptions. But 16 states say parents can refuse to vaccinate their kids for so-called philosophical reasons. Okay, those are the ones that lawmakers are really upset about, and they probably will be overturned, at least in a couple of states soon. I asked the leader of one of the anti-vaccination injury groups. Her name is Barbara Lowe Fisher of the National Vaccination Information Center. So I said to her, Ms. Fisher, what do you think is more dangerous? The measles vaccine, is that more dangerous than measles itself? And I pointed out that measles killed up to 500 people a year, mostly children, before the vaccine wiped out the disease 20 years ago. Her answer was essentially, perhaps. She said, quote, "For some, the vaccination is more dangerous than measles, so some children are being sacrificed for the rest." That's her point of view. Now, I don't agree with her. I do not agree with her. But her point of view is rooted in painful personal tragedy. She said her son was a precocious 2.5-year-old before he got his whooping cough vaccination, not the measles vaccination. He got a DPT vaccine that caused neurological damage. And she says, as an adult now, her son struggles to function in society. Her organization was created in 1982 by a group of mothers with similar experiences, and they've been fighting for 4 decades for safer vaccines as well as informed consent. Now, the group is especially upset by a 6-2 Supreme Court decision in 2011 that overturned the Reagan-era Vaccination Act that her group worked on. The court decision bars anyone from suing vaccine makers for damages caused by their products. The vaccine makers, for all intents and purposes here, have blanket immunity. You cannot sue them. So, Jill, I looked up the case, and guess what? So, a 6-2 decision. How do you think that broke along conservative, liberal lines?
Absolutely no clue. How?
Okay. The 2 judges who voted to allow the lawsuits, and of course they were voted down, so they're in a minority, they were the most liberal. That's Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Sonia Sotomayor. Ms. Fisher said, quote, "That ruling threw a lot of people injured by vaccines under the bus." I don't agree with Ms. Fisher on a number of points, but I do agree with her on the court ruling. Vaccine makers should be held liable for defects in the design, manufacturing, and labeling of their products. And I think this ruling has undermined a lot of confidence that people have in the government that you're protecting us from bad vaccine. Look, by and large, we know there are studies that vaccines are actually safe and effective, but then you hear about a court case like that and you say to yourself, well, the government isn't doing enough to help us. They're just mandating things. So experts who favor the court's ruling say that, and this is just on a practical level, say that the suits would, they'd lead to dramatic multi-million-dollar awards in court. You can imagine that. Disabled people go before a judge. You got a sympathetic jury, and obviously you get these big awards. And the experts say, look, hey, that would lead to companies, these pharmaceutical companies, deciding to stop making the vaccines. That's going to cause shortages, and the ones who stay in the market are going to raise their prices to unaffordable highs. That's the practical side of it. But you know what? I side with Ms. Fisher on this one. No one should be above the law, certainly not pharmaceutical manufacturers making billions of dollars, partly because the government requires children to get vaccinated to attend school. Okay, Joe, enough of that stuff. Okay, here's the good news. There's a lot parents and grandparents can do to make their kids' schools safer from disease like the measles, okay? First and foremost, get your kids vaccinated. How many times do we have to say this? Get your kid vaccinated at 12 months and again at 4 years of age before they go to school. Okay, but bear in mind that you get your kids vaccinated, but that child with just one shot still has a 7% chance of getting the measles. And even after the child has had both shots, there's still a 3% chance. So there's more you can do to keep your kid safe beyond getting them vaccinated. Start by asking your school's PTA 2 questions. Do we know what percent of students and staff are vaccinated? And second question, are the rates posted for all to see? Now, in Vermont, all schools must post student vaccination rates. At first, when they started this, the rates ran from 97%, to 0 for a small church school with 9 kids. Experts say a school is safe from an outbreak at around 93%. That's called community immunity. But sadly now, only 80% of parents think their kids should have all their vaccines before they start school. So in Connecticut, and I'm telling you this, as we speak, Jill, Government Lamont is releasing the student vaccination rates for the first time in history for all schools. That's everything except small schools with fewer than 30 kids, because they might be able to be identified publicly. So it's virtually all schools, those posting the rates of their of the vaccinations in their schools. You can be safe. Go to your school. You see it's above 93%. Your school has community immunity. Okay. In Massachusetts and New York, if the PTA doesn't have that information for you, I would suggest you organize and meet with the principal. Now, if that goes nowhere, go to the district superintendent. And then if you still have to move on, go up to the State Department of Health. The Department of Health makes the rules that the schools enforce. It's a good place to go. If all else fails, you can always organize student-parent protests at your school. And Jill, I'm going to make a little prediction here. If this measles epidemic continues and more people learn about the faculty loophole and posting vaccination rates at the school level, I think you're going to see a lot of school protests on TV, and you're going to see it all over the country. So one more point on Ms. Fisher. And this is on our point about informed consent. She says, the bottom line here, she says people should sit down with their doctors before they make a final decision about vaccinating. And you know what? That's exactly what the health experts and the education experts say. They're saying the same thing. They're saying at the end of the day, get yourself educated, but go see your doctor if you have any questions or qualms. So, and a Vermont lawmaker named Dr. George Till I talked to, he told me parents should never rely only on what they might see on TV or on the internet, and then include sites like Ms. Fisher's. He says, sit down with your doctor. Now, that's a fully qualified doctor, not a homeopathic healer or a chiropractor or anyone else who says they have a special treatment that's better than a vaccine. They don't have a special treatment. They don't have a magic cure. They'll rip you off and leave you vulnerable to disease. So go to your family doctor, a pediatrician, and you'll learn that there are 4 decades of studies that show vaccines are safe and effective. And I think you'll come to the conclusion that your kid should get vaccinated to protect himself or herself, to protect your family, protect your neighbors. So, Jill, that's my message for this morning.
Right, and to protect your in-laws, and to protect your, there's so many people. And I think that, again, baffled that, that wouldn't be your first stop. Go see your doctor.
Right.
Discuss.
Well, what Ms. Fisher is saying and what some others are saying is that going to your doctor doesn't have to be your first stop. You may not think you may make the decision just to vaccinate your kid just based on what you're reading.
I'm talking about the people who don't. Okay, we got a minute.
Doubts,
right?
If you have doubts, there is. I'm not saying you shouldn't look at what's on the internet, but the internet is there's a lot of anti-vax stuff out there. Her group is she bristles at being called an anti-vaxxer. She bristles at that. She says, "Oh, look, I've been fighting for safer vaccines."
Right.
Okay, and I think she's got a real good point about the Supreme Court. Informed consent, I don't agree with, because it's a blanket dropout, escape hatch, and what happens to everyone else in the community if you've got that kind of blanket individual. Supreme Court has ruled specifically on that and has come down against her point of view and says it's in the community interest to get vaccinated. So we know the Supreme Court, she likes the Supreme Court, doesn't like the Supreme Court ruling in one case. She's not going to like it in the other one either, because that would slap that down.
Right, but the point, and I know you did some super sleuthing on Wakefield, so I want to know about that, and we're going to run out of time. But what I want to say is, if you have doubts about what is right for you to do, and you can't just fall on the side of, well, for the community, for the sake of, then that's when you talk to your doctor. That's all I'm trying to say.
Yes, and I think that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. If you still have lingering doubts or serious doubts, sit down with your doctor. But that's a pediatrician. That's a real medical family doctor.
That's not,
we've got a terrific internist
not Dr. Google.
Turn to. It ain't Dr. Google.
All right.
Okay. So, all right, we've made that point. Okay, Wakefield. Now, Wakefield, you've brought up Wakefield in the past. Wakefield's a guy who did a very dubious study that linked autism with vaccines. It was completely debunked. He's booted. He lost his credentials. He's been discredited right and left. He has the lowest standing you could imagine. You got to lift up a rock to see where he is in the medical firmament. Okay, Jill, guess where he was spotted not so long ago?
The White House.
Very good. Not quite, but really good. So this debunked creator of the false myth, it's called one of the biggest hoax in medical history, linking vaccines to autism. Totally not true. Guy was working with the vaccine makers. He had a financial interest. He only looked at 12 patients. It was a complete fraud, okay? And he's been debunked. Guess what? He showed up as a guest at one of Donald J. Trump's inaugural balls. What was he doing there? What could he possibly be doing there?
Dancing.
Maybe celebrating fake science?
Oh, but that was a while ago. I'm sorry. I thought it was more recent. I thought he was.
What do you mean a while ago? It was 2 years ago.
Yeah,
2 years ago.
But right, you did see, and I was going to ask you about this, but we are out of time. But it was notable a couple of weeks ago that it was last week, right after we did our show, and I thought you must be probably home upset, but at the president came before a gaggle and he said get vaccinated, and I thought was he talking to Frank?
Well, no. The point about that was, as recently as 2014, he was a vaccine doubter.
Right.
But yes, as recently as 2014. But in the last couple of weeks, he has said, "Get your vaccines," and I'm glad he did.
Thank you, Frank, the healthcare detective and the health correspondent for Parade. Send your questions or concerns about finding affordable healthcare to healthcaredetective@robinhoodradio.com. Frank will try to address as many of your questions as he can on future broadcasts. And look for his book, Your Best Healthcare Now, available online and in store.